The courtroom buzzed with a quiet, unsettled energy as the heavy wooden doors creaked open. All heads turned toward the entrance where a teenage boy walked in, shoulders square but eyes cautious. Malik Johnson, just 17, wore an oversized grey hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers still dusted with Georgia clay. He clutched a worn leather satchel to his side as though it carried the weight of something far more important than books. He moved down the aisle, ignoring the curious stares. Whispers flickered like wind through wheat. Some of the spectators leaned toward one another, murmuring questions. Is that the defendant's brother? Who let him in? Is this some kind of joke? A bailiff built like a linebacker and just as stern narrowed his eyes and stepped forward as Malik reached the front row. "Son," he said with authority, "court's not open to the public just yet. You can take a seat in the back." Malik glanced up at the nameplate above the empty bench, Judge Raymond Kellerman. He then looked back at the bailiff, calmly replying, "I'm not here to watch, sir. I'm here to speak." The courtroom doors closed with a loud thud, silencing the last of the murmurs. A heavy wooden door behind the bench creaked open, and Judge Kellerman entered in his black robe, face tight with habit and disapproval. He was in his late 60s, with neatly combed silver hair, pale skin, weathered by years of gavel strikes and opinions. His reputation preceded him. Tough on crime, tough on youth, tougher on those he thought didn't belong. His sharp eyes scanned the courtroom and stopped abruptly when he saw Malik standing near the defense table. He squinted. "Are you here to support someone?" he asked, not bothering to hide the sarcasm. "This isn't a school tour, and Halloween's not until October." Laughter rippled through the rows of prosecutors and officers behind the rail. Malik didn't flinch. He stepped forward calmly, opened his satchel, and placed a neatly bound folder on the defense table. His voice was even, though young. "No, Your Honor. I'm representing the defendant today, Marcus Reed." The room stilled again, but this time it wasn't because of whispering. It was the kind of quiet that follows a car crash. Judge Kellerman stared at him for a beat longer than comfort allowed. Then he leaned back slightly in his chair, scanning Malik from head to toe as though trying to decide whether he was being pranked. He raised one brow and tilted his head. "Is this some kind of performance for social media? Because if it is, I can hold you in contempt." "No, sir," Malik said. "I've been appointed under emergency bar exemption by the state due to my accelerated education program. All documents are with the clerk, and I've already filed my motion for entry of appearance." The judge's lips thinned into a line. He glanced toward his court clerk, who was already sifting through papers. The prosecutor, an older man in a crisp navy suit, smirked as if he were watching a comedy act unfold. "You're telling me," the judge said slowly, "that you, wearing a hoodie and baby-faced like a freshman, are a licensed attorney here to argue a criminal defense case?" "Yes, Your Honor," Malik replied, meeting his eyes. "And I intend to win." Muffled gasps stirred in the back. The bailiff blinked twice. The smirk on the prosecutor's face began to wilt. Judge Kellerman didn't say anything for a long moment. He just stared at the teenager standing before him with the stillness of someone trying to solve a riddle they didn't even want to understand. Finally, he muttered under his breath, "Well, this should be interesting," and banged the gavel once. "Court is now in session." The judge leaned forward, squinting at Malik as if the boy were a smudge on the courtroom floor that wouldn't wipe clean. "You're what now?" he asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and irritation. "You're telling me you're this defendant's legal counsel?" He gave a dry laugh and looked around the room. "This isn't a game, son. You're in a court of law, not some school debate team. Take a seat before I have you removed." From the prosecution table, the older attorney, Mr. Reynolds, couldn't hold back a chuckle. He leaned toward his microphone and said loud enough for the room to hear, "Is this a TikTok prank or are we really doing this today?" A few people in the courtroom laughed, not out of cruelty but confusion. The idea seemed ridiculous. A teenager in a hoodie claiming to be a lawyer. It felt like something out of a poorly written sitcom. But Malik didn't flinch. He remained calm, sliding a neatly organized folder from his bag and stepping forward. Your Honor, I'm licensed to practice under Georgia's special bar acceleration program, designed for academically exceptional individuals. I've passed the bar exam and have been approved under supervised exemption for real-time litigation representation. The judge blinked. Malik continued, holding up the papers. Here are my bar certification, education history, letter of recommendation from the state bar, and a signed clearance from the presiding judge of the 9th District who oversaw my initial trial evaluation. Judge Kellerman motioned to his clerk without saying a word. She rose quickly, took the folder, and moved briskly back to the bench. The judge flipped through the documents while muttering quietly, reading, verifying names, checking seals. Give me your bar number, he demanded without looking up. Malik recited it smoothly. The clerk typed it into the state database. Everyone waited. The room, moments ago noisy with laughter, now sat stone still, like it was holding its breath. A few agonizing seconds passed. Then came the sound of the clerk's soft voice. Everything matches, Your Honor. He's cleared. All paperwork is valid. The judge looked up sharply. Mr. Reynolds, the prosecutor, cleared his throat and sat back in his chair, expression stiff. The laughter had stopped. The smirks had faded. In their place was silence, uncomfortable, uncertain, and laced with the kind of realization that lingers when you've just misjudged someone in public. Kellerman stared at Malik again, but this time his eyes had lost the edge of mockery. Something more complex brewed there now. Confusion, maybe, or curiosity struggling to climb past old prejudice. Finally, the judge sat back in his chair and spoke, quieter this time. Very well. The court recognizes Mr. Malik Johnson as legal counsel for the defense. Malik nodded respectfully. Thank you, Your Honor. The judge banged his gavel once, but softer than before, as if he wasn't quite sure what world he was ruling over anymore. Years before Malik ever stood in front of a judge, he was a little boy in worn-out shoes trailing behind his mother through the corridors of high-rise buildings in Atlanta. His mother, Denise Johnson, cleaned offices at night and worked the front desk of a laundromat during the day. She raised Malik alone in a cramped apartment where the hum of broken air conditioning and the pop of neighborhood gunshots were just part of the lullaby. She didn't have much, but what she had, she gave to him. Before he could write his name, Denise had taught Malik how to read cereal boxes, street signs, and eventually old newspapers she picked out of waiting room trash cans. By the time he was 3, he was reciting full sentences from flyers on the laundromat bulletin board. At 5, he was solving Sudoku and logic puzzles with the confidence of a grown man. When his kindergarten teacher tried to hand him a coloring book, he politely asked if she had anything more challenging. Malik was different, and the world around him noticed. Teachers praised him, but classmates teased him. He was called names. Nerd, weirdo, and most painfully, the kid who talks white. While others his age played video games or chased each other in the streets, Malik buried his nose in books, old encyclopedias, and anything his mother could afford from thrift stores or yard sales. Denise would come home from her late shift with a new surprise every few weeks. Sometimes a used dictionary, sometimes a tattered paperback on American history, and once, a thick, outdated criminal law textbook from a university donation bin. Malik devoured it, not because someone told him to, but because something inside him stirred whenever he read about justice, arguments, the Constitution, or people who dared to stand up in court and speak for those who couldn't. By the time Malik was 11, he could recite Miranda rights, explain habeas corpus, and outline entire landmark Supreme Court cases. But none of that stopped the bullying. In school, he was mocked for speaking too proper, laughed at for using big words. He withdrew, spent more and more time at the public library near their housing complex, sitting in the corner with volumes of legal transcripts printed from the old computer system. And that's where he met Mr. Franklin Simmons. Simmons was a retired defense attorney, a quiet man with greying hair and a permanent frown who had once practiced law downtown, but left the profession after a bitter civil rights case. He noticed Malik sitting alone one afternoon, flipping through a trial document that most second-year law students would have struggled to understand. Simmons asked him a question. Malik answered. Simmons asked another, this time about case precedent. Malik nailed it. The next day, Simmons returned with a stack of annotated briefs and a curious look in his eye. He had never met a kid like this. Not in law school, not in courtrooms, not anywhere. For the next 3 years, Simmons mentored him, taught him not just the law, but how to wield it with both logic and compassion. He enrolled Malik in advanced online coursework, helped him apply for accelerated legal prep programs, and eventually homeschooled him full-time by 14. Malik's mother, though exhausted, did everything she could to support it, skipping meals, pulling double shifts, even sleeping at the laundromat some nights to save on bus fare. She never complained, just smiled and said, "If the world won't open the door for you, baby, you make one." By 15, Malik took the LSATs and scored a perfect 180, something fewer than 0.1% of test takers achieve. The world still saw a kid from the projects, but inside Malik, a storm of brilliance had been brewing for years, and now, finally, it was beginning to rise. As the trial began, Malik took his place beside Marcus Reed, a quiet, wide-eyed 18-year-old wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt and shackled wrists. Marcus sat stiffly, unsure whether to feel hope or humiliation. He'd been arrested 2 months earlier, accused of stealing a gaming console from a white-owned electronics store on the edge of town. No fingerprints, no footage showing him inside, just a blurry image of a tall, dark-skinned male in a hoodie near the scene, and a cashier who said Marcus looked like the guy. It was weak evidence, but in this town, weak evidence often led to strong convictions, especially if the defendant looked like Marcus. The prosecutor, Mr. Reynolds, stepped forward confidently for his opening statement. He painted Marcus as a troubled youth with a tendency to loiter and familiarity with the juvenile system. He used the words known presence, uncooperative, and likely match over and over. Then with a smirk he added, "And as you've seen, the defense has elected to be represented in a rather unorthodox fashion." He didn't need to say more. The implication hung heavy in the air. This kid's lawyer is just another kid. Malik rose quietly for his own opening, the courtroom watching like they were waiting for him to trip over his first sentence. But he didn't. His voice was clear, steady, controlled. "What the prosecution offers is not proof," Malik began, "but perception. They see a hoodie and a skin tone and assume guilt. Today, we will prove that assumption wrong." From that moment, the trial became a war of dignity. Reynolds, clearly annoyed by Malik's poise, made constant objections, leading the witness, speculative, irrelevant. Each time, Malik responded with precise references to rules of evidence and procedural code, confident but never arrogant. The judge, who had started the day rolling his eyes, now leaned forward slightly, listening more carefully than before. Then came the surveillance footage. The prosecution's video showed a tall figure in a dark hoodie loitering outside the electronics store at 6:45 p.m. The alleged time of the theft. That was their key piece. But Malik requested permission to introduce footage from the pizza shop 2 doors down. The court clerk hesitated, but allowed it. "Your Honor, the timestamp from the electronics store shows the suspect at 6:45 p.m., Malik explained. "But here's Marcus Reed, on this footage, ordering pizza at 6:42 p.m. and still waiting for it at 6:49. The video played. There was Marcus, laughing with the cashier, texting on his phone. The pizza shop's camera had a more accurate clock, synced with the police dispatch system. A murmur passed through the courtroom. Then Malik questioned the arresting officer. "You said you apprehended Mr. Reed because he matched the description in the video," Malik said. "Yes. And you didn't check timestamps across businesses on that street? We didn't think it was necessary. You didn't ask for alibi witnesses from the pizza place?" "No." Malik turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the prosecution's case relies on a blurry image and an assumption that fell apart the moment someone decided to look beyond it." For the first time all day, Judge Kellerman didn't look annoyed. He didn't look amused. He looked thoughtful. And in the back row, even a few jurors nodded. The courtroom sat hushed as Malik stepped up for the most important moment of the trial, his cross-examination of Officer Daniels, the man who had arrested Marcus Reed. Daniels took the stand in full uniform, arms crossed, chin high. He was a veteran of the force, confident and certain in his authority. But as Malik approached the witness stand with a calm, composed stride, there was a flicker of uncertainty in the officer's eyes. Perhaps it was the silence in the room. Perhaps it was the teenager standing in front of him who no longer seemed like a boy, but a force. "Officer Daniels," Malik began, "you testified that you identified Mr. Reed based on surveillance footage, correct?" "Yes," Daniels replied, folding his hands. "You also stated that Mr. Reed matched the suspect in height, build, and attire." "Yes, and when you approached Mr. Reed, what was your reason for detaining him? He matched the description and was walking near the scene. That made him a person of interest." Malik paused. "Was he doing anything illegal when you approached him?" "No." "Was he running?" "No." "Yelling? Acting erratically?" "No." "So your suspicion was based entirely on his clothing and his presence in the neighborhood?" Daniels shifted in his seat. "Combined with his resemblance to the video, yes." "Would you say that you approached him because he looked suspicious?" "Yes. That's part of an officer's job, recognizing suspicious behavior." Malik nodded slowly. "And what, in your experience, makes someone look suspicious?" There was a pause. Daniels hesitated. "Depends on context." "In this context, what was suspicious?" Daniels hesitated again. "The hoodie, the time of night, his demeanor." "His demeanor, meaning?" "He looked like he didn't want to be seen." Malik leaned in slightly, or maybe like a black teenager who was used to being followed for no reason. "Objection." The prosecutor stood abruptly. "Speculation, Your Honor." "Sustained," Judge Kellerman said, but not harshly. Malik continued. "Officer Daniels, are you aware of the precedent set in Illinois v. Wardlow, 528 U.S. 119, 2000? Daniels narrowed his eyes. "Somewhat. In that case, the court ruled that sudden flight in a high-crime area may give rise to reasonable suspicion," Malik said. "But simply being present in that area, especially while doing nothing wrong, is not enough." Daniels didn't answer. Malik turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, the defense contends that Marcus Reed was stopped and detained not because of his actions, but because of his appearance. His hoodie, his skin, and his presence were treated as evidence." He looked back at Daniels. "Would you have stopped a white teenager wearing the same hoodie?" Silence. "I can't answer that," Daniels muttered. "You just did," Malik said softly. A ripple ran through the courtroom. Someone in the back whispered, "Damn." Judge Kellerman's jaw tightened. His fingers drummed the side of the bench, but he didn't interrupt. Malik stepped back, addressing the court. "This is not just about a hoodie. It's about how assumptions turn into arrests, and how bias, whether conscious or not, can shatter lives. The law demands more than suspicion. It demands reason. It demands fairness." He paused, then delivered his final line, letting it echo. "The law should not see color, but if it must, let it see the full spectrum of justice." For a moment, no one moved. The courtroom, once so skeptical, now hung on his words. Even Judge Kellerman, lips pressed together, gave the faintest nod. After the tension of the cross-examination, court recessed for lunch. The crowd trickled out slowly, some still whispering about Malik's final quote, others exchanging glances that said, "This boy might actually win." As Malik gathered his notes at the defense table, a quiet voice interrupted him. "Mr. Johnson," Judge Kellerman said, standing at the edge of the bench. "A word, in chambers." Malik hesitated. The courtroom had seen this judge scold, humiliate, and shut down attorneys for less. But now his tone was not stern, exactly, just unreadable. Malik nodded and followed. Inside the judge's chambers, the air was noticeably different. Quieter, warmer, cluttered with leather-bound books, dusty gavels, and framed degrees. The blinds were half closed. Sunlight spilled across the desk like a secret trying to escape. Kellerman motioned to the chair across from him. He didn't sit right away, just stood near the window, his robes slightly shifted, revealing an old service pin on his suit jacket beneath. "You're not what I expected," the judge said, not facing him. "I'm used to that," Malik replied gently. The judge let out a dry breath, not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. "You ever lose someone you believed in?" he asked, turning just slightly. Malik didn't answer. "I mentored a student once," Kellerman continued. "He was a lot like you, bright, bold, came from nothing. Black kid from Macon. I helped get him into college. He was the first person to ever call me his friend." The judge's voice faltered. "He was shot. Wrong place. Wrong night. No trial. No suspects. Just gone." He finally sat down, folding his hands. "I guess, when I saw you walk into my court, dressed the way you were, I thought I was seeing another story with the same ending." Malik's voice was calm. "That story's not mine, sir." "No," Kellerman admitted. "It doesn't look like it is." Then came the question he'd clearly been holding. "You're smart enough to do anything. MIT, Yale, Silicon Valley. Why law? Why the courtroom?" Malik's reply came without hesitation. "Because the courtroom is where voices get silenced and where they can be heard. People like Marcus don't get the benefit of the doubt. They don't get second chances. Sometimes they don't even get first ones. If people like me don't speak for them, who will?" The judge leaned back, studying him. "You're young," he said finally. "The law's going to break your heart more than once." Malik nodded. "Let it. I'll just build stronger arguments." The silence that followed was heavy, but not cold. It was full of something unspoken, respect, maybe, or the realization that something old might be making way for something new. Kellerman stood and walked to the door. "Back to court, Mr. Johnson." "Yes, Your Honor." As Malik stepped into the hallway, he didn't smile, but he stood taller, and behind him, Judge Kellerman paused in the doorway, looking at the young man with eyes no longer filled with doubt, only thought. The courtroom was packed tighter than ever as both sides prepared for closing arguments. The air felt heavier, like everyone knew this wasn't just about a verdict, it was about what it meant. Mr. Reynolds, the prosecutor, was up first. He went for emotion, hammering on the idea of accountability. He acknowledged the video inconsistencies, but leaned hard on reasonable suspicion, claiming that Marcus's presence at the scene still raised valid doubts. His voice rose, his arms swept through the air, but something about it felt forced, too polished, too loud. Then it was Malik's turn. He didn't walk up with theatrics, no dramatic pauses or passionate outbursts, just a legal pad in one hand, his voice steady and quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this case isn't about a hoodie or a zip code or a person being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's about the burden of proof. something the law demands we carry with care. He took a breath and kept going. You were shown a blurry video and asked to match a shadow to a life. You were told that presence equals guilt, but presence isn't proof. Suspicion isn't evidence, and fear is not the same as fact. He looked toward Marcus, who sat motionless beside him, eyes wide. Marcus Reed was arrested based on what someone thought they saw, not what they knew. No fingerprints, no merchandise, no confession, just an assumption dressed in a stereotype. He raised the folder that contained the timestamps from the pizza shop footage. We proved he was somewhere else. We showed that the arresting officer made no effort to confirm that. We've done our part. Now it's your turn. He paused, then ended with the same calm clarity that had carried him through the trial. The law doesn't ask us to convict because we're uncertain. It asks us to acquit unless we're sure. Be sure, be fair, be just. He stepped back. No flourish, no applause, just silence. The jury filed out. The wait was only an hour, but it stretched like string pulled tight. Marcus gripped the edge of the defense table, his mother seated behind him, mouthed silent prayers. Even the judge looked unusually still, fingers laced together as he waited. Then the foreman returned, holding the folded slip of paper. It was handed to the clerk. She stood and read aloud. On the charge of felony theft, not guilty. A gasp came from the gallery. Marcus's mother clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes flooding instantly. She stood trembling, tears streaking down her cheeks. Marcus looked to Malik, stunned, speechless, and then he hugged him, quickly, tightly, like someone afraid it might be taken away. Malik didn't speak. He just returned the embrace with one hand, the other still holding his notes. Judge Kellerman banged the gavel once. Court is adjourned. But before the room could erupt, he leaned forward and spoke again. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "this court recognizes your clarity, your composure, and your command of the law. I hope your presence here today will not be your last." There was a pause, and then he added, just loud enough, "The law needs more like you, and maybe fewer like me." Malik nodded quietly. He didn't smile until Marcus whispered, "You saved my life, man." Only then, just then, did the corners of Malik's mouth lift, not in triumph, but in something far rarer, vindication. Later that afternoon, the sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as people poured outside. Marcus and his mother held hands, their faces still streaked with tears, the gravity of the moment not yet fully settled in their bones. Reporters hovered, their microphones raised like spears. But Malik kept his head down as he walked beside them, his satchel slung over his shoulder, hoodie slightly rumpled. Unbeknownst to him, someone had been recording during the final moments of the trial. The video, shaky, vertical, and raw, captured Malik's closing argument in full, his quiet voice, his unshakable presence, and that final line, "Be sure, be fair, be just." The camera panned briefly to the stunned courtroom, the gavel dropping, and the words, "not guilty," hanging in the air. Within hours, the clip exploded online. Teen lawyer destroys prosecutor in court. 17-year-old outsmarts judge and walks away a hero. Young black genius defends innocence and wins. The story hit every major platform: Instagram Reels, Twitter trends, YouTube news channels, even mainstream evening broadcasts. People couldn't get enough of him. Hashtags like #MalikTheMind, #RealJustice, and "not." Your average lawyer surged through the internet. Some called him a hero, a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation legal mind. Others weren't so kind. Comment threads turned political. Accusations flew. Affirmative action, reverse racism, publicity stunt. Some questioned the legitimacy of the trial, his credentials, even whether the entire thing had been orchestrated. But the video kept spreading, past doubters, past headlines, past borders. Law schools reached out, inviting him to speak. Talk shows offered interviews and appearance fees. Civil rights groups offered awards. TV studios proposed documentaries. But Malik declined them all. When a local news crew finally caught up to him the next day outside the Equal Ground Community Centre, where he'd gone straight after the trial, he answered only one question. "Malik," the reporter said breathlessly, "how does it feel to be famous overnight? You're a symbol of a new era in justice." He looked into the camera, calm and clear-eyed. "It was never about me," he said. "It was about MOCKS. It's always about the people who don't get heard." And with that, he walked past the cameras and through the centre's front doors, disappearing from view. He didn't want to be the face of a moment. He wanted to be the voice behind a movement. A year later, far from the cameras and courtrooms that once made him a national headline, Malik Johnson stood in front of a modest brick building on the south side of Atlanta. The faded sign above the door had been replaced with bold, clean letters. The Equal Ground Project. The centre wasn't grand. There were no marble floors or polished conference rooms. Just 6 small offices, a library of donated legal books, and a community room lined with mismatched chairs. But it was exactly what Malik had envisioned. A space where justice didn't feel like a distant institution, but a tool placed directly in people's hands. The doors opened 5 days a week. The clinic took on juvenile cases, misdemeanors, and public defense appointments for free. But that was only part of the mission. Every afternoon, after casework ended, a new kind of education began. Dozens of teenagers from the surrounding neighborhoods gathered inside. Some were students, others were probationers, a few were repeat offenders. All of them were searching for something. Purpose, maybe, or just someone who believed they could be more. Malik met them where they were. He didn't preach. He taught. Debate structure, logic breakdowns, how to analyze evidence, how to speak clearly, argue respectfully, and most importantly, how to listen. He brought in guest speakers, judges, former inmates, poets, professors. Each week ended with a courtroom simulation where the kids took turns being prosecutors, defenders, even judges. He called it Trial Day. They called it Justice Fridays. And slowly, something began to shift. A boy who used to run with a crew started quoting Thurgood Marshall. A girl who once froze when asked to read in class now stood and delivered a fiery closing argument that left her peers speechless. Walls built from fear and silence cracked open, and what emerged was potential. Across town, Judge Raymond Kellerman retired quietly. No grand farewell, no party. Just a short statement and a closed door. His health had declined, and so had his desire to sit in judgment. One morning, weeks after the clinic opened, Malik received a letter without a return address. Inside was a check for $25,000, enough to cover 3 interns, a new batch of computers, and a part-time counselor. There was no note, just a typed line. For the ones we failed the first time around. Malik knew the handwriting on the envelope. He didn't say anything. Instead, he had a small plaque made and mounted in the library. Justice is not a destination. It is ground we must keep leveling, one step at a time. In honor of all who changed their view as the city outside moved fast, cars honking, people rushing. Inside the Equal Ground Project, time felt slower, more intentional, and Malik, now just 18, worked late every night. Still in his hoodie, still quiet, still listening, building something that wasn't about headlines or praise. He wasn't trying to change the system overnight. He was just planting seeds in a place where justice had rarely taken root. 10 years later, the courtroom looked different, but the eyes inside it hadn't changed much. Same skeptical stares, same stiff suits, same silence when a young black teenager was led in wearing a hoodie and cuffs. Only this time, The bench wasn't occupied by an old, weathered judge with tired eyes. It was occupied by Malik Johnson, now 27, the youngest federal judge in the state's history. He sat with quiet authority, robed in black, posture straight, eyes calm. The nameplate before him read, Honra Sua Malik J. Johnson, but his presence needed no introduction. His reputation preceded him, sharp, fair, unshakable. He had spent the last decade dismantling injustices from within, one ruling at a time. The defendant before him couldn't have been older than 16. Skinny frame, downcast eyes. Hoodie pulled up like armor. He shuffled in, hands cuffed in front, escorted by 2 officers who walked like they were already sure of the outcome. Spectators murmured, lawyers whispered. Malik didn't look at the officers. He didn't look at the paperwork. He looked at the boy. Then he leaned forward slightly, just enough to close the distance without raising his voice. "I see you came prepared," he said softly, his gaze catching the edge of the boy's hoodie. The team glanced up, confused. "Sir?" Malik offered a small nod. "That's what I wore the first time I walked into a courtroom too. People thought it meant I didn't belong. They were wrong. So let's hear your side." There was a beat of silence. Then a small shift in the boy's shoulders, as if the weight of the courtroom had suddenly gotten a little lighter. The prosecutor frowned. The public defender blinked, unsure if they'd heard correctly. But Malik had already turned the page, not just on the docket, but on a legacy, because this wasn't about a hoodie. It never had been. It was about how the law was used, about who it served, about whose stories were allowed to be told. And Malik, once mocked for standing in front of the law, now sat behind its highest desk. Proof that brilliance knows no uniform and justice has no age.